see the exciting, vivid pictures of Jesus. Jesus on the move, Jesus doing things. Immediately, suddenly, and certainly unexpectedly, on a lightning-stopped tour of the life of Jesus. The wind of fresh air blowing through everywhere. So that's what we're about to do today. And so I need two readers. Well done, Sonia. Can you read the first day in a minute? Can Lindsay do B? And can David do the second day? There's a story inside the story, B stories inside the A stories, so that they mutually interpret each other, and I'll go through why in a few seconds. So I've forgotten those names already. So please don't. Sonia said.
Yes. Mark 5:21 to 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the lake. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be well and live." So he went with him.
Lindsay, darling.
And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease."
While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what he said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. Sorry, I'm out of sync. Right. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion?" People weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Sorry, it's difficult to do two different things.
Yes.
I'm going to read it as on the screen. Sorry, it's not quite the same translation. And they laughed at him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother, and those who were with him, and went where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kume," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't realise I'm facing the wrong way.
No, I couldn't spot which version you'd used. That was English Standard.
Yes. So here we have a dramatic Markean Sandwich where the story of Jairus' daughter is on the outside, A and A, and B is the story of a woman with a hemorrhage. And basically, this is done so you can mutually interpret them. Quite often, if you go to university or do A-level history or English or something, you have a question. Compare and contrast. And we're going to do that. Now, if it's a Bible study, we'd do that in little groups, and it'd be far better for us because we'd have to work hard and think hard. But anyway, I'm just going to tell you the answers. So, first we have the similarities. What do they have in common? Both those healed are females. Both touch or are touched by Jesus. Both victim of desperate circumstances. Both called daughter by Jesus. 12 years is very important in both stories. For example, the woman's illness lasted that long, and the daughter, that was her age, 12 years old. Death is involved in both cases. Social death for the woman, and physical death for the girl. So Jesus meets the rebukes in both cases. It's all about uncleanness, ritually uncleanness, which is cast onto Jesus. They're hopeless, helpless cases. There's no hope outside of Jesus. What about the differences, contrasts, or divergences? Jairus is a rich man of power. She's very poor. Insignificant woman. Jairus had clout to summon Jesus to his house. This woman has no name, no position, no clout. She approached Jesus from behind. Jairus approached him face to face. She alone has faith. So she's an important one, the only thing that matters in both these stories. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease. Things like gender, name, uncleanness, and shame do not matter in the end. All that matters is Jesus and trust in him. Trusting, believing, having faith in, and relying on Jesus. None prevented her pushing through to Jesus. Faith has no limits. Even raising the dead is possible. Trust Jesus in spite of all that seems contrary to it. And uncleanness is going to lead us to Mark 7, which we're going to do in a few weeks' time. And Jesus has a lot to say about it. Very relevant for Gentiles coming into the church a lot later on. So now in verse 21, we're back on Jewish territory. We've been in Gentile territory. We've seen the gathering demoniac healed. Now we've crossed the river, lake, and we're back in Jewish lands. Jairus is one of the leaders of the synagogue. He organised worship and teaching there, like a secretary. But he's definitely not a rabbi, a teacher, or a preacher. They were different. He looked after the admin and the fabric of the synagogue. Does it remind you of anybody here? No. Michael! Let's clap him for his good work.
Yeah.
So Michael, Jairus, comes to Jesus. However mighty he is, he's desperate and pleading. His daughter's at a critical point, death's door, sinking quickly. But Jesus is very happy to be interrupted, to have his schedule interrupted, and he goes with this desperate parent. He goes with the through line. This is why I come. We see here his commitment to people. We see here his great commitment to people. All are human individuals to him. Verse 25 to 26. Though there's no moment to spare, Jesus is stopped. Another supplicant, quieter, but no less urgent. Strong language is used of her, at least in the Greek. She's whipped, lashed, scourged, tormented by her situation. It's a very difficult life for this poor woman. Her condition puts her in a situation of great shame. Great shame in a society based on honour shame. We hear a dramatic volley of words. We hear many. She suffered much under many physicians and spent all that she had and was no better, and she grew rather worse. In many ways, she's no better off than that poor dying girl. In the Old Testament law, a woman is unclean during and then afterward, after for 7 days of her period, Leviticus 15. But here she had protracted gynecological problems, so she's unclean throughout the duration and unclean all the time. No temple closed to menstruating women, no sex, no contact with children, no worship, no friends, full of shame, an outcast from society. No physical contact with anyone of any sort ever. Like a leper, she's one of the living dead. Is that bad?
Yes.
Could it be better?
Yes.
Yeah. It's one of the most difficult situations encountered in the Bible. Socially dead, spiritually dead, and very, very, very alone. Yes, do you see that? But she had, key word, but she'd heard all about Jesus and came and touched him. Like a true disciple, she acts on what she's heard about Jesus. But do we? 12 years of terrible shame and frustration ends in just one moment at the powerful touch of Jesus. Remarkable, verse 30. Though she is technically and ritually unclean, social stigma, and violated Torah, Jesus says she's a great model of faith. Wow, what's this guy? He's interesting, isn't he? He makes her a model and example and singles her out from the crowd. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease. Jesus, that's what you do, Jack. Jesus kept looking all around. He's persistent. She desires a cure. Jesus desires a relationship. So he's got to find out which one it was for all the people around him. He encounters her person to bring her to the kingdom of God. It's not just her felt needs, but also her presenting needs. He meets our deepest underlying real needs. Now she is in the presence of Jesus, known by him, seeing his gaze. She cannot dodge him or evade following him. She came in fear and trembling, but she meets sheer, tender compassion. She's ritually unclean according to the ritual of law of Moses. So she should not be there. She should not be in a crowd, not near a ritually clean Jesus, and definitely not touch a holy man. That's all extreme. But Jesus is there with contagious holiness. So we don't see the uncleanness going from the woman to Jesus, which is what the Old Testament says. But we see holiness going from Jesus to the women and destroying all that uncleanness. But holiness goes from him to destroy this uncleanness and sin and evil. Jesus assures her that she's healed, even of her mental scars. No more mental barrage for her now. She is now a full member of God's new society. But then, new issues arise, dramas intensify, new arrivals announce to Jairus. Your daughter is dead. We just had this hospital interruption for the woman with the hemorrhage, but it's cost the girl her life. Hope is now totally gone for Jairus, his friends and family. Jesus just ignores it all and turns to him and says, look away from your death and focus on Jesus, and that's true for us. Don't fear, only believe. Do not be afraid. Just believe, trust, and have faith in Jesus. Just as the woman had, she didn't quite say that. Believe in God, all things are possible. So we see in 37 to 40, it's just the inner circle. Paul, James, John, with the parents, and Jesus, they're the only ones who go into the bedroom. They encounter a dirge. At that time, even the poor had to hire at least 2 flutes, 1 wailing woman for the funeral. They laugh at Jesus. They scorn and mock him. But these are the professional mourners and the hardcore realists. So if they say the daughter's dead and she's dead, it's a desperate circumstance. Then, physical contact. A word from Jesus, just as with the woman. Then we have total restoration, a completely astonished crowd. They were overcome with amazement. Jesus is prepared to help anybody, especially the marginalised and the vulnerable. There's no limits. Even raising the dead is possible. Trust Jesus despite all the things which are contrary to it, just like Jairus and the woman. And this uncleanness will be then treated in chapter 7 of Mark, probably in a few months. Give us faith, Lord, so that we totally trust and rely upon you, Lord Jesus, all the time. Like the woman here, let us have deep, deep faith and a truly deep, deep relationship with Jesus. And have a heart full of gratitude for all you've done for us, as you did for these 2 people, and perhaps more on that day. What a wonderful day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you found that sermon helpful and would like to join us again on another Sunday. In the meantime, you'll find resources available at our website, on YouTube, so please do take the opportunity to have a look, but let's hope to see you soon. God bless you.